The night my father died, he whispered to my brother, "Use your sister like I used your mother. Punish her if she disobeys." For years, I lived under the yoke of a man who learned cruelty as one learns to pray, at the knees of a tyrant. Good afternoon, my dears. What a joy to chat with you today. I'm Nancy Mae Thompson, 73 years young, born in a small town called Millbrook in rural Alabama, but today I live here in Asheville, North Carolina, this beautiful historic town that welcomed me after all the twists and turns life takes. I'm sitting here on my porch, where I spend my afternoons knitting and watching the street. You know, this porch is my sacred little corner. I have all my plants arranged in colorful pots that my granddaughter Victoria painted for me. I have my rocking chair that's been with me for more than 30 years. And from here, I can see the Asheville sky that changes color every day, looking like a different painting with each sunset. I started knitting as a young girl, but it was only after 60 that I turned it into my little breadwinner. I make doilies, placemats, and those cute sweaters that young ladies love so much these days. Who would have thought that this old-fashioned art I learned from my mother would become fashionable again? It's the Lord showing that nothing is lost in this life. Everything has its right time to bloom. I sell my pieces at the local crafts fair every Saturday. It's not much money, but it helps buy my medications, and there's still enough left to give a little treat to my great-grandchildren when they come to visit. And the best part is seeing the joy on the faces of those who buy my work, knowing that a little piece of my handiwork will be in someone's home, bringing beauty. Oh, and you who are watching me now, please do me a favor and leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel, okay? Turn on the notification bell too. It's so important for this old lady to continue telling her stories and perhaps help someone who's going through difficulties similar to what I faced. And tell me in the comments, which town are you watching from? Is it early morning while you're having your coffee, or at the end of the day when you're resting? I read all the comments with great affection and imagine each one of you on the other side of the screen. Today I want to tell you a story that I've kept in my heart for a long time. A story about how patriarchy can create deep roots in a family, and how sometimes we need a lot of courage to pull out those roots. It wasn't easy to live through what I did, but today I understand that every tear shed brought me here, to this peace I feel now. In my day, girls didn't have a voice. I grew up hearing that women were born to serve, to bow their heads and accept. But life taught me, in the hardest way, that accepting oppression only makes it grow stronger, like weeds in fertile ground. It was a bitter lesson, but necessary. I still remember as if it were yesterday the smell of the house where I grew up, the sound of my father's footsteps approaching, and the heavy silence that fell over all of us when he entered. We were like frightened birds, unable to sing, unable to fly. And it was in this nest of fear that I began to understand what it meant to be a woman in a world commanded by men who confused respect with fear. I was born in 1952 in a simple wooden house at the end of the main street in Millbrook. My father, Gerald Thompson, worked as a truck driver, transporting goods between farms in the region. He was a tall man, with skin burned by the sun, calloused hands, and a thick mustache that he tended with pride. He had dark eyes that seemed to harden like stone when he got angry, which happened frequently. My mother, Martha Thompson, was small and thin, always with her hair tied in a tight bun. She had a discreet beauty that seemed to want to hide, as if being noticed was dangerous. Her hands were always in motion, washing, cooking, sewing, as if stopping was an unforgivable sin. She spoke little and smiled even less. My older brother Arnold was 5 years older than me. He was a copy of my father, not only in appearance, with those same hard eyes, but especially in manner. From a young age, he already positioned himself as the man of the house when Dad traveled, repeating the same orders, the same authoritarian gestures. Our house was simple but clean, a portrait of my mother's daily effort. It had only 3 rooms: the living room that also served as a bedroom for my parents, with a bed covered by a patchwork quilt that my mother sewed, the little room that I shared with my brother, separated only by a sheet hung in the middle, And the kitchen, with a wood stove that left everything smelling of smoke. The bathroom was a wooden outhouse in the yard, next to the apple tree that gave shade on hot days. The yard was my refuge. There were chickens scratching around, a bed of herbs that my mother tended with care, and enough space for me to play without attracting too much attention. There I could be a child, away from my father's ever-vigilant eyes. I made rag dolls in secret because those silly things, as he called them, only served to make me soft, useless for work. My routine began before sunrise. My mother would wake me up whispering so as not to disturb my father. "Nancy, get up, honey. There's water to fetch." And off I'd go with the bucket to the well, about 500 yards from the house. Then I'd help light the fire, prepare coffee, and still had to leave everything tidy before going to school. When I returned, it was time to help with lunch, wash the dishes, and then accompany my mother in her work doing laundry for others, which she did to supplement the little that my father brought home. Arnold, meanwhile, would go out to play with the other boys or accompany my father in some jobs. "A man needs to learn to be a man from an early age," my father would say, proud to see my brother following in his footsteps. At school, I was a quiet girl. I sat at the back of the class and hardly ever raised my hand, even when I knew the answer. Teacher Dolores was the only one who noticed my frightened manner. "Nancy has intelligence, but she seems like a little bird afraid to sing," she said once to my mother, who just lowered her eyes, recognizing in that description not only her daughter, but herself. My best friend was Celeste, daughter of the general store owner. She had such a different life from mine. She could wear colorful dresses, had real dolls, and her father let her help in the store, talking with customers. When I went to her house, I was enchanted by the freedom she had, but also embarrassed because my dress was always the same, patched in several places. "Why doesn't your father let you come play at my house after school?" Celeste would ask. And I, not knowing how to explain, would just say I had many chores at home. The truth was that my father wouldn't let me have friendships. "A woman who stands around gossiping in the street is no good," he always repeated. "A girl's place is inside the house, learning to serve." On Sundays, we went to Mass at the Baptist church. It was the only time we went out together as a family. My mother would put on her only good dress, light blue with small flowers, and pin a flower in her hair. During these times, I saw a different sparkle in her eyes, as if for a moment she could be another person, away from the walls of our house. It was during these trips to church that I began to notice that not all families were like ours. I saw fathers who talked with their daughters, mothers who laughed out loud, girls who wore colorful ribbons in their hair and could run around the churchyard after the service. But when I mentioned this to my mother once, she just squeezed my hand and whispered, "Each home has its way, honey. In ours, it's better to stay quiet." The first signs that our life wasn't normal began when I was about 8 years old. It was on a Sunday afternoon, after church. My father saw my mother talking with Mrs. Zoe, the town midwife. We returned home in silence, but as soon as the door closed, he exploded. "Who gave you permission to chat? What were you talking about with that gossip?" My mother, trembling, explained that she was just talking about medicine for a headache. It didn't help. He grabbed her by the arms and shook her so hard that she hit her head against the wall. Then he locked her in the room, and we spent the rest of the day listening to her crying, muffled by the pillow. My brother, who witnessed it all, showed no emotion. He just said, repeating the words he had heard so many times, "A woman has to know her place." And I, with fear and confusion, began to understand that there was something deeply wrong in the way we lived. In the Millbrook of the 1950s and 60s, this was not the exception. The women of my community lived in the shadow of their husbands. Patriarchy wasn't questioned. It was the natural order of things. Men commanded, women obeyed. Men spoke, women were silent. At the market, in church, at the town festivals, this dynamic was present in every interaction, in every lowered gaze, in every permission asked. And so I grew up, between fear and submission, learning to make myself invisible to survive, watching my mother wither a little each day, while my brother transformed into the continuation of what we feared most. When I turned 13 in 1965, our lives changed dramatically. Dad, who had always seemed as strong as a wild bull, began to waste away gradually. First, there were the back pains he disguised, then the dry cough that wouldn't go away, until one day he fainted in the middle of the market, falling on top of the goods he was selling. Dr. Evans, the only doctor in Millbrook, examined my father carefully and then called my mother for a private conversation. She returned home pale, with red eyes, but said nothing. It was only at night, after my father had fallen asleep under the effect of medicine, that she told me in whispers, "Your father has a disease in his lungs, honey. The doctor said it's serious." In the following months, I watched my father, that man who seemed indestructible, lose strength and vigor. The disease consumed him from within, like a candle burning to the end. The frustration of not being able to work, of depending on the care of the wife he had always treated as a servant, made him even more bitter. The shouting decreased, not out of kindness, but from lack of strength, but the harsh words remained as sharp as knives. "This house is becoming a mess," he would complain from the bed, observing our every movement with critical eyes. "A woman without a firm hand lets everything fall apart." And my mother, poor thing, would bend over backwards to care for him, the house, and still do extra work to make up for the money he no longer brought home. My brother Arnold, now 18, took on some of my father's work, but the money was little. He spent more and more time by the bedside, listening to advice and orders, as if my father were transmitting an invisible testament, passing on not only the role of provider, but mainly that of absolute master of the house. "A man who doesn't control his house isn't a man," I heard my father tell him one night. "After I'm gone, don't let these two do whatever they want. A woman is like an animal. She needs a tight rein." During that period, I took on more responsibilities at home so that my mother could devote herself to caring for my father. I dropped out of school in the middle of the year. Studying doesn't fill the stomach, as my father always said. I started washing clothes for others with my mother, and also doing small jobs at Celeste's father's store, who, seeing our situation, offered help. It was during this time that I met Lenora, a lady from Montgomery, who spent seasons in Millbrook, visiting her sister. Unlike the women in town, Mrs. Lenora had studied, worked as a teacher, and lived alone, without a husband. By the standards of our community, it was almost a scandal. I remember the day she came into the store and saw me organizing the shelves. "What a smart girl you are," she commented, seeing how quickly I calculated change in my head. "You should be in school, not working." "My father is sick. I need to help at home," I replied, embarrassed. "I understand, dear, but never let circumstances steal your dreams. There are many paths in a woman's life besides serving others." Those words kept hammering in my head. Paths? What paths could a girl like me have, raised to serve, to bow her head, to accept? My father's health worsened every day. In August of that year, he was admitted to the small-town hospital. Tuberculosis, that was the name of the disease that no one pronounced out loud, had already taken over both lungs. The doctors said it was a matter of days. Our house was strangely silent without his oppressive presence. At night, I caught my mother crying alone in the kitchen. "What will become of us, my daughter?" she asked, with lost eyes. It wasn't so much out of love for her husband, I realized, but out of fear of the uncertain future. Her whole life had been shaped to depend on and obey. The absence of the oppressor also left her lost. "We'll manage, Mom," I replied, holding her calloused hands. "You know how to wash and sew like nobody else. I can work more at the store, and Arnold is getting Dad's job." For a brief moment, I glimpsed the possibility of a different life. Perhaps without my father, we could breathe a little, reorganize our house, our lives. Maybe I could even go back to school, as Mrs. Lenora had suggested. But hope didn't last long. In the early morning of the third day of hospitalization, we were called urgently to the hospital. My father was in his final hours. When we arrived, he could barely speak, but he signaled for my brother to come closer. I saw, With a chill down my spine, my father pulled Arnold close, whispering something in his ear. My brother nodded solemnly, as if receiving a sacred mission. My father's eyes, even clouded by the proximity of death, shone with an intensity that frightened me. Then he turned his face to the wall and said nothing more. My father died that same morning, without saying goodbye to me or my mother. Only to Arnold, his heir, not of material goods, for we had nothing, but of a way of seeing the world, of treating women, of exercising power. The funeral was simple and quick. Few people attended, just some work colleagues and neighbors. My mother cried silently, more out of obligation than feeling, I imagine. I couldn't shed a tear. I felt a confusion of emotions. Sadness for the loss of a father who, despite everything, was my father. Guilt for also feeling a secret relief, and a growing fear as I observed my brother's hardened face, which seemed to have aged years in that single day. On the way back home, Arnold walked ahead in silence. My mother and I followed him a few steps behind, as it had always been with my father. When we arrived, he entered first, waited for us to close the door, and then said in a voice I didn't recognize, "From now on, I am the man of this house." My mother lowered her eyes, out of habit. I stared at him, surprised by the authoritarian tone. He held my gaze with a hardness that made me back away. "Things will continue to function as they always have," he continued. "Mom takes care of the house. Nancy helps. The money you earn, you give to me. I decide what can and cannot be done." "But Arnold," my mother began timidly, "perhaps we can divide the responsibilities differently now." She didn't finish the sentence. My brother pounded his fist on the table with such force that the few plates we had shook on the shelf. "Dad told me what to do. Those were his last words. Be the man of the house and use your sister to get things done. If she doesn't, punish her the same way I did." That's what he told me, and that's what I'm going to do. I felt a shiver run down my spine. So that's what my father had whispered on his deathbed. Not a blessing, not a request to care for the family, but a passing of the baton of oppression. A father teaching his son how to continue his legacy of fear and control. That night, lying on the mat next to my mother's bed, Arnold had taken my parents' room for himself. I heard her muffled crying. I took her hand in the dark and squeezed it. Neither of us said anything, but we understood, in that silent moment, that our suffering had not ended with my father's death. It had just changed faces. The following days confirmed my fears. Arnold, who had previously been just a boy following in his father's footsteps, now seemed possessed by his spirit. He took on all his habits. He sat in the chair that had been my father's, demanded to be served first at meals, controlled our outings from the house. "Where are you going?" he asked abruptly when he saw me dressed to go out, a week after the funeral. "I'm going to work at the store, as always," I replied, confused by the question. "No more. I don't want my sister serving other men." "But we need the money. You said so yourself." The slap came quick and sure, leaving my face burning and eyes watering. Not from the physical pain, which wasn't much, but from the surprise. Arnold had never hit me before. "Don't argue with me. I'll find you another job in a family home where there are no men around." I saw my mother in the corner of the room, paralyzed, her face a mask of resignation. She had lived this for so many years that now she seemed numb. But I, at 13, felt a rage growing inside me, a rage that I didn't know how to express or where to direct. And so began our new life under Arnold's command, a life that in many ways was even worse than the previous one. My father, with all his harshness, at least worked outside all day. Arnold was always present, watching, controlling, criticizing our every move. He got me a job at Mrs. Gertrude's house, a wealthy widow who lived alone with her maids. There, I washed, ironed, and cleaned from dawn to dusk, for a pittance that went straight into my brother's hands. Even so, it was a relief to be away from home, away from his watchful eyes. It was at Mrs. Gertrude's house that I began to have contact with other realities. The other maids, older girls like Edith and Daisy, talked about boyfriends, about dreams of marriage, about distant places like New York or even California. I listened to everything silently, absorbing those possibilities like someone drinking water after much thirst. One day, Edith noticed the bruises on my arm, marks of Arnold's fingers when he grabbed me for having stayed beyond the permitted time to return from work. "Who did this, girl?" she asked, concerned. "Nobody. I bumped into the corner of the table," I lied, embarrassed. Edith looked at me with a mixture of pity and understanding. "I know how it is. My father was like that too, until I managed to run away from home. There are men who confuse being a man with being an executioner." That was the first time someone openly named what was happening in my house. It wasn't normal. It wasn't right. It wasn't a man thing, as everyone said. It was cruelty. It was abuse. At night, in the kitchen of our house, while washing the dinner dishes, I felt my brother's gaze upon me. A different look, which gave me a chill in my stomach. "You're taking too long with those dishes," he commented, approaching. "What are you thinking about there with that face?" "Nothing, Arnold. I'm just finishing up." He came closer, standing right behind me. I felt his hot breath on my neck. "You're becoming a pretty young woman, you know that? Just like Mom when she was young." I froze. There was something in his voice, in the way his hands touched my shoulders, that filled me with a dread I had never felt before. I dropped the plate in the basin and moved away abruptly. I need to help Mom with the sewing," I stammered, practically running to the other room. That night, lying next to my mother, I couldn't sleep. My father's words on his deathbed echoed in my head. "Use your sister to get things done." How far did the meaning of those words go? What kind of use was my brother thinking of making of me? I looked at the profile of my sleeping mother and wondered if she had gone through this too. If beyond the submission, the slaps, the shouting, there were other forms of abuse that she had silently endured all those years. The idea filled me with such disgust and sadness that I had to bite the pillow to not cry out loud. It was on that night that I understood, with crystal clarity, that we needed to leave that house, somehow, anyhow, before it was too late. The months that followed were a slow descent into an increasingly deep nightmare. Arnold, now 19, seemed to grow in authority and cruelty with each passing day. The quiet boy who had lived in his father's shadow had transformed into a man determined to prove he could be even more severe, more controlling than his predecessor. The money I earned at Mrs. Gertrude's house went straight into his hands. He waited for me at the door every day, extending his open palm as soon as I arrived. "Where's the payment?" he would ask, counting the coins carefully. If he thought something was missing, he would accuse me of hiding money, search my pockets, sometimes even my hair, as if I could hide coins among the braids. "Why do you need to check, Arnold? I would never keep anything," I complained once. "Because that's how women are, always hiding, always lying," he replied, repeating the same words our father used to say. At home, the rules became even stricter. We couldn't receive visitors. The windows were always closed, even on the hottest days. My mother, who was already quiet, seemed to be disappearing gradually like a drawing in the sand that the tide slowly washes away. "Mom, you can't let him treat us like this," I whispered one night as we mended clothes by the weak light of the lamp. She raised her tired eyes to me. "He's the man of the house now, daughter." "But this isn't right. You're his mother." She simply lowered her head and continued sewing. "That's how things are, Nancy. A woman who defies a man only finds more suffering." That resignation hurt me more than Arnold's slaps. Seeing my mother, an adult woman so completely defeated, made me lose hope that we could ever change our situation. At night, Arnold started drinking whiskey, just like our father used to do. He would come back late, smelling of alcohol and sweat, slamming doors and knocking over furniture. In these moments, my mother and I would cower in a corner, praying quietly that he would soon fall asleep without noticing us. One of those nights, however, he came in more agitated than usual. He had lost money gambling, I found out later. He started shouting, saying the house was dirty, the food poorly made, that we were two useless women who only caused expense. "What are you looking at?" he shouted at me when he noticed my frightened look. "Do you think I'm wrong? That I don't know what's best? Who do you think you are to judge me, you insolent girl?" Before I could answer, he grabbed me by the hair and dragged me to the yard. My mother ran after us, begging, "Arnold, for the love of God, she didn't do anything." "Yes, she did. She's challenging me with that look. You think I don't see? Just like all of them, wanting to give orders, wanting to have their own will." In the yard, he opened the little door to the chicken coop. "Want to act like an animal? Then you'll sleep with the animals." And he pushed me inside, locking the door from the outside. "Let's see if you learn to respect." I spent the entire night in that tiny space, among frightened chickens, smelling the strong odor of manure, hearing the sounds of the night and crying silently. Not from fear, although I was afraid, nor from humiliation, although I felt humiliated. I cried from anger, a deep, visceral anger that grew inside me like a storm. When dawn came, Arnold opened the door. He was calmer, almost remorseful. "I hope you've learned your lesson," he said, not looking me in the eyes. "Now go wash up and get to work. Mrs. Gertrude won't like it if you're late." I obeyed in silence. What else could I do? Where would I go? Who would help me? In Millbrook, everyone considered it normal for the man of the house to punish women as he saw fit. It was their right, their obligation to maintain order. The women of the town themselves repeated this, like my mother. At Mrs. Gertrude's house, I tried to hide the marks and fatigue, but Edith, with her attentive eyes, noticed. "What happened, girl? You look like you didn't sleep." "It was nothing," I lied. "Just a bad night." She looked at me for a long moment. "You know, Nancy, when I was your age, I also said it was nothing, until the day it was almost everything." I didn't respond, but her words kept hammering in my head. Until the day it was almost everything. What did that mean? How far did things have to go before my mother, recognized that we were in danger? Arnold's punishments became more frequent and more cruel. Sometimes it was the chicken coop, other times it was going without food or spending hours kneeling on corn kernels. Any reason would do. A poorly washed dish, a response considered insolent, a look that he interpreted as a challenge. There was always a reason to show who was in charge. At work, I began to notice Mrs. Gertrude's suspicious looks. It wasn't possible to forever hide the bruises, the constant fear, the startling at every noise. One day she called me to her room. "Nancy, I need to ask you something and I want you to be honest," she said, sitting in her rocking chair. "What's happening in your house?" I swallowed hard. "Nothing, ma'am. Everything is fine." "Don't lie to me, girl. I've seen a lot in this life." "I know the signs." I lowered my eyes, unable to sustain her gaze. "It's my brother, since my father died. I couldn't continue. The tears came, uncontrollable. Mrs. Gertrude waited patiently for me to calm down. "Does he hit you and your mother?" I nodded. "Have you tried talking to Pastor Johnson? Or to the police?" "Pastor Johnson is his friend, ma'am, and the police. What will they do?" "Everyone thinks it's normal. They say it's a family matter." Mrs. Gertrude sighed deeply. "Unfortunately, you're right. This place still lives as if we were 100 years in the past." She thought for a moment, then added, "If you need help or a place to stay for a while, you can count on me." I thanked her, moved by the offer, but we both knew it wasn't that simple. Where would I go? What would I do with my life? And my mother? I couldn't abandon her. Winter came, bringing heavy rains that transformed the dirt roads of Millbrook into mud pits. Our house, already precarious, began to show leaks and dampness in the walls. Arnold ignored these problems, spending the money on drink and gambling. The situation was getting more difficult every day. One night, I came home from work, and found my mother fallen on the kitchen floor with a split lip and a black eye. "Mom, what happened?" I ran to help her. He wanted dinner and there wasn't enough food," she murmured as I helped her sit up. "He said I was hiding food, that I was stealing money." The anger rose like a wave inside me. "This can't continue, Mom. We have to do something." "Shh," she silenced me, terrified. "He'll be back soon. Don't say anything, Nancy. Please don't provoke him." Arnold came back late that night, more drunk than usual. He entered stumbling over the few pieces of furniture, cursing, looking for more reasons to vent his frustration. I had helped my mother to lie down and was pretending to sleep, praying that he wouldn't come to us. But he did. He stopped at the door of our improvised room, his silhouette cut out against the weak light of the kitchen lamp. "I know you're awake," he said, his voice slurred by drink. "Come here." I pretended not to hear, keeping my eyes closed and my breathing regular. He took a few steps into the room. "I told you to come here, Nancy. Don't make me come over there to get you." Fear paralyzed me. There was something different in his voice, something that went beyond the usual anger. I slowly opened my eyes, seeing him approach my mat. "Arnold, please. I'm tired," I whispered. "I worked all day." "I'm tired too," he replied, crouching beside me. "Tired of supporting two women who are good for nothing." I felt his sour whiskey breath as he leaned over me. His rough hand touched my face, then went down to my neck, my shoulder. "You're already 14, you're not a child anymore," he murmured. "It's time you were good for something, besides being an expense." Panic took hold of me when I understood what was happening. My father's words on his deathbed now made a terrible and complete sense. "Use your sister," he had said. And that was exactly what Arnold intended to do. "No, Arnold," I begged, trying to move away. "This isn't right. We're siblings." He gripped my arm firmly, preventing me from backing away. "I decide what's right, and you'll do what I tell you." I looked desperately at the bed where my mother was lying. She had her eyes open, fixed on us, full of terror and impotence. For an instant, our gazes crossed, mine begging for help, hers overflowing with an old and familiar pain. Slowly, to my astonishment, she got up. With her face still swollen from the previous blows, she walked to where we were. "Arnold," she called, her voice trembling but determined. "Leave the girl alone." He turned, surprised by the interference. "Go back to bed, Mom. This isn't your business." "Yes, it is," she replied, taking another step forward. "She's my daughter. She's your sister. What you want to do? It's a sin. It's a crime." It was the first time I saw my mother confront a man. After years of silent submission, something inside her had finally broken, or perhaps strengthened. The threat to me, her daughter, had crossed a line that not even my father had dared to cross. Arnold stood up, stumbling with rage and alcohol. "Who do you think you are to tell me what to do? You're nothing. You've never been anything." "I'm your mother," she replied, with a dignity I had never seen before, "and I won't let you do this." The slap that followed echoed through the room, making my mother stagger backwards. But to my surprise, she didn't fall. She remained standing, one hand on her marked face, the other extended as if forming a barrier between Arnold and me. "You can hit me as much as you want," she said, her voice firmer now. "You won't touch the girl." Something in her posture, in that sudden and unexpected courage, seemed to confuse Arnold. Accustomed to complete submission, he didn't know how to react to this challenge. For a moment, he stood still, blinking in confusion, as if he didn't recognize the woman in front of him. Then, with a curse, he turned his back and stumbled out of the room. We heard the front door slam shut. My mother collapsed beside me, trembling. I hugged her, feeling her tears wet my shoulder. "Thank you, Mom," I whispered. "Thank you." She held my face between her hands, her eyes meeting mine with an intensity that startled me. "Nancy, he'll be back, and the next time I may not be able to stop him. "What are we going to do?" I asked, my voice failing with fear. She took a deep breath, as if gathering strength from the depths of her soul. "We'll have to run away from here. We have no other choice." That night marked a change in our family dynamic. For the first time, my mother and I united not only in shared suffering, but in the determination to escape it. In whispers, as we waited for dawn, we began to plan our escape. But it wouldn't be easy. We had no money saved. Arnold took everything. We had nowhere to go. Our closest family lived right here in Millbrook, and they certainly wouldn't support us against the man of the house. We didn't even have documents. Arnold kept them locked up along with what little money was left. Besides that, there was fear. The paralyzing fear of being caught, of suffering even worse consequences, of leaping from the known, however terrible it might be, to the totally unknown. "What if we don't make it?" I asked, giving voice to this fear. My mother squeezed my hand in the darkness. "Then at least we will have tried, daughter, and God will help us." In the days that followed, we lived in constant tension. Arnold seemed remorseful about the incident, treating us with a cautious distance that was almost worse than open violence. It was like living with a sleeping storm, knowing that at any moment it could awaken with full force. At Mrs. Gertrude's house, I worked with redoubled dedication, hoping for an opportunity to get some extra money without Arnold knowing. Edith noticed my dedication. "You're working as if your life depended on it, girl," she commented as we cleaned the silverware together. I looked around, making sure we were alone. "Edith, I need to ask you something. When you left your father's house, how did you do it? Where did you go?" She stopped what she was doing, staring at me seriously. "Why do you want to know that, Nancy? Are things that bad?" "Worse than you can imagine," I replied, lowering my voice. He tried with me." I couldn't complete it. Edith paled, understanding what I couldn't say. She placed her hand over mine. "I'll help you. I don't know how yet, but I'll think of something." That promise was like a ray of hope in the darkness we were living in. But time was running against us. Arnold was drinking more and more, becoming more unpredictable. My mother and I slept in fear, putting a chair against the door of our improvised room. One night, while washing dishes after dinner, I felt his presence behind me. He was sober, which was rare lately, and that somehow frightened me even more. "Nancy," he said, his voice strangely calm, "I need to tell you something." I turned slowly, my hands wet and trembling. "What is it, Arnold?" "I've been thinking. You're old enough to get married. Joe Small, Mr. Aiken's son, is interested. I've already talked to him." I was paralyzed with shock. Joe Small was a man of almost 40, known in town for having been widowed twice under suspicious circumstances. He was Arnold's drinking buddy, a rough man who looked at women as if evaluating a piece of cattle. "I don't want to get married," I finally managed to say, my voice almost gone. "I'm not asking for your opinion," Arnold replied coldly. "It's already settled. He's coming to talk to you on Sunday after church, and you'll behave, understood? It's a good opportunity for our family." "Our family? You're going to sell me to a man who could be my father, and you call that an opportunity?" The slap came quickly, but this time I was prepared. I retreated in time, and his hand only grazed my face. "Ungrateful," he vociferated. "I'm taking care of your future. What do you think is going to happen to you? Do you think you're going to stay here forever, being an expense? You need a man to control you, to teach you to be a real woman." My mother appeared at the kitchen door, alerted by the shouting. "What's happening?" "Your Arnold decided I'm going to marry Joe Small," I replied, before my brother could speak, my voice trembling with anger. I saw the horror in my mother's eyes. She knew that man's reputation as well as I did. "Arnold, for the love of God, the girl is only 14 years old." "Old enough? Didn't you marry at 15? And she's already getting talked about in town, working outside, coming home late. It's better she marries soon, before she causes problems." That night, locked in our room, desperation reached its peak. The arranged marriage was only 4 days away. We had no more time for elaborate plans. "We'll have to run away tomorrow," my mother whispered. "No matter how, no matter where, I can't let this happen to you, my daughter." Lying in the darkness, thinking about the next day, about the leap into the unknown we would have to take, I felt a fear that went beyond anything I had ever experienced. But along with the fear, there was something more: determination. For the first time in my life, my mother and I were taking the reins of our destiny, saying no to what was imposed on us. We didn't know what awaited us, but anything would be better than that prison, that life of constant fear, that feeling of not even belonging to our own bodies. And so, with this mixture of terror and hope, I waited for the dawn of the day that would change our lives forever. The day dawned gray, as if the sky knew the weight of the decisions we would have to make. I got up even before the rooster crowed, my body aching from the poorly slept night, my mind agitated by 1,000 contradictory thoughts. My mother was already up, arranging the kitchen as if it were a normal day. "He's still sleeping," she whispered when she saw me. "Drank a lot last night." We nodded in silence, understanding the opportunity this gave us. Arnold usually slept late when he drank too much, sometimes until noon. It would be our chance. With silent movements, as if executing a rehearsed dance, we began to prepare the few things we would take. A small bundle for each one, just the essentials, 2 changes of clothes, a comb, the only photograph we had of the family before everything fell apart. My mother also took the rosary that had belonged to her grandmother, and I, hidden at the bottom of a drawer, the little notebook where I wrote my secret thoughts in the rare moments of privacy. "What about the money?" I asked quietly as I rolled up my clothes. "He keeps everything locked up." My mother breathed deeply, her eyes fixed on the door of the room where Arnold slept. "I'll have to get the key. He keeps it under the pillow." Fear tightened my chest. "Mom, it's too dangerous. If he wakes up—" "If we don't take some money, we won't get anywhere," she replied, with a determination I had never seen in her eyes before. "You finish packing things. I'll go get it." Before I could protest, she was already walking to the room, her steps so light they barely touched the dirt floor. I was paralyzed, my heart pounding in my chest as I watched her disappear through the door. The minutes that followed seemed like hours. I imagined 1,000 terrible scenarios: Arnold waking up, catching my mother, the violence that would follow. I could barely breathe, my ears alert to any sound. Finally, she reappeared, her face pale, but with a small bunch of keys in her hand. "I got it," she whispered, also showing a crumpled bill. "It was in his pants pocket." With trembling hands, she opened the chest where Arnold kept the money and our documents. She took just enough, we didn't want him to notice immediately, and our birth certificates. "Now we need to leave before he wakes up," she said, keeping everything in a handkerchief tied to her waist under her dress. "You'll go to work as usual, and I'll take the bundles hidden to the crossroads. From there, we'll head to the bus station." The plan was simple. I would go to Mrs. Gertrude's house, as I did every day. My mother would take our few things and meet me at the crossroads of the main road, away from the curious eyes of the neighborhood. From there, we would go to the bus station, where we would take the first one that passed, no matter where to. The important thing was to leave Millbrook, to get out of Arnold's reach. I left the house at the usual time, trying to act naturally, although my heart was beating so hard I was sure anyone could hear it. My mother hugged me at the door, something she rarely did with witnesses. "May God protect us, daughter," she whispered in my ear. "See you soon." The path to Mrs. Gertrude's house never seemed so long. Each person who passed by me seemed a potential informer. Every look was a threat. Did they notice something different about me? Did they guess my plans? Arriving there, I needed to act normally for a few hours, then invent an excuse to leave early. The plan was to meet my mother around 10 in the morning, the time when the bus to Birmingham passed by the station. Working that morning was torture. My hands trembled so much that I broke a glass while washing it. "Are you sick, girl?" asked Mrs. Gertrude, noticing my nervousness. "I think so, ma'am." "I have a headache and a bit of a fever," I lied, taking advantage of the opening. She put her hand on my forehead. "You really are hot. Better go home and rest." It was the excuse I needed. I thanked her and prepared to leave, my heart leaping. That's when the kitchen door opened violently and Arnold entered, his face contorted with fury, his eyes bloodshot. "Where is she?" he shouted, grabbing my arm with such force that I felt his fingers sink into the flesh. I froze with terror. "Who? Don't play dumb. My mother. You thief! She stole my money and disappeared." The world collapsed on me. Something had gone wrong. My mother wasn't at the meeting point. Had she been caught? Had she fled without me? Mrs. Gertrude, alarmed by the invasion and violence, entered the kitchen. "What's going on here? Let go of the girl immediately." Arnold didn't even look at her. "This is a family matter, ma'am. This wretch and her mother stole my money. I'm taking her home now." "No, you're not," Mrs. Gertrude replied with surprising firmness. "She works for me and is under my responsibility while she's here. Let her go, or I'll call the police." For a moment, I saw hesitation in Arnold's eyes. Even in his state of fury, he knew that assaulting a respected lady like Mrs. Gertrude would have consequences. He slightly loosened his grip on my arm. "I'll wait outside," he said through clenched teeth, "but she's coming with me when she finishes work. And woe to her if she doesn't appear." When he left, I collapsed in tears. Mrs. Gertrude hugged me, letting me cry on her shoulder. "What's happening, Nancy? The truth now." Between sobs, I told her everything. The escape plan, the money, the meeting that should have happened. She listened in silence, stroking my hair. "Your mother must have been discovered," she finally said, "or else she's waiting in another place, afraid he might follow her." "What am I going to do, Mrs. Gertrude? He'll kill me when he takes me home." She thought for a moment, then said with determination, "He's not taking you anywhere. Stay here. I'm going to send for Sheriff Bernard." "No," I exclaimed, terrified. "The police won't do anything. They'll say it's a family matter." "Bernard is my cousin," she replied with a tense smile, "and he owes me a few favors. Trust me." While Edith went to call the sheriff, Mrs. Gertrude hid me in her room, locking the door. Through the window, I could see Arnold walking back and forth in the street, occasionally drinking from a bottle he brought in his pocket. His face was getting redder, his posture more agitated. The hours dragged on, each minute an eternity of fear and uncertainty. Where was my mother? Had she managed to escape? Or was she somewhere hurt or worse? Finally, I heard voices downstairs. The sheriff had arrived, accompanied by 2 officers. I couldn't hear the conversation, but soon the sounds of argument increased. Arnold was shouting, demanding they hand me over, claiming his rights as the man of the house. Suddenly, a different cry, of pain. I ran to the window and saw Arnold being immobilized by the officers, while the sheriff said something I couldn't make out. Arnold struggled, cursed, threatened, but he was subdued. A few minutes later, Mrs. Gertrude opened the door to the room. "They took him to the police station," she informed. "He'll spend the night there to cool off, but tomorrow they'll probably release him." "And my mother?" I asked, my voice choked. "I sent people to look for her around town. If she's still in Millbrook, we'll find her." I spent the rest of the day in a state of shock, alternating between crying fits and moments of torpor. In the afternoon, one of Mrs. Gertrude's maids returned with news. My mother had been seen at the station, but hadn't boarded the bus. No one knew where she had gone afterwards. At nightfall, sitting in Mrs. Gertrude's kitchen, I was drinking a tea that Edith had prepared to calm my nerves. That's when we heard weak knocks on the back door. Edith went to answer and came back almost running, her face lit up. "It's your mother!" I jumped up, knocking over the cup. At the door, leaning on the doorframe, was my mother. Her face was bruised, her dress torn, but her eyes shone with a fierce determination. "Mom!" I ran to hug her, tears flowing freely. "I thought I had lost you." "Almost, my daughter," she replied, entering with difficulty. He woke up when I was leaving. He caught me with the bundles. Mrs. Gertrude and Edith helped her sit down, bringing water and a clean cloth to clean the wounds. It was the worst beating of my life, my mother continued, her voice weak but firm. He said he would kill me when he finished, that he would get you and do the same. But I managed to escape when he went to look for the belt. I hid in the church basement all day. Now you're safe, Mrs. Gertrude assured. Both of you are. Arnold will spend the night in jail. But tomorrow he'll be free, my mother said, fear returning to her eyes. And it will be worse. Much worse. Mrs. Gertrude squeezed our hands. That's why you need to leave tonight. The bus to Birmingham passes at midnight. I have a nephew there who can receive you for a while, until you find a safe place. But we don't have money, I lamented. Arnold took it all back. I do, Mrs. Gertrude replied with a gentle smile. Consider it an advance for the good work you did here, Nancy. That night, we waited at the small Millbrook station, hidden in the shadows, fearing that at any moment Arnold might appear. The money Mrs. Gertrude had given us was safe in my mother's corset, along with a letter for the nephew in Birmingham. I'm afraid, Mom, I confessed, as we waited for the bus. What if it doesn't work out? What if he finds us? She held my hand tightly. Birmingham is big, daughter. He'll never find us there. And if he tries, this time we'll be prepared. What do you mean? She opened the bag Mrs. Gertrude had given us and showed, hidden among the clothes, a small revolver. A farewell gift from Sheriff Bernard, she explained. He said a woman alone needs to know how to defend herself. I swallowed hard, shocked. I had never seen a gun so close, much less in my mother's hands, that woman who had always been the personification of submission. Would you know how to use that? I asked, frightened. Her eyes met mine, hard as I had never seen them. To protect you, my daughter, I would do anything, anything. The bus horn cut through the night, announcing its arrival. We got up, holding our small bundles, ready to take the leap into the unknown. When the bus stopped at the station, releasing steam and noise, I felt one last moment of hesitation. What if it's worse there, Mom? At least here we know the people, the place. We know suffering, Nancy, she replied, gently pushing me toward the step of the bus. Now we're going to know freedom. As the bus left Millbrook behind, carrying us to an uncertain future, I watched the town lights disappear into the darkness. There, somewhere, was our house, our few things, my father's grave, and a jail where my brother was spending the night, probably swearing revenge. That night, lying on the hard seat of the bus, watching my mother finally fall asleep after days of terror, I had a dream. I dreamed of a different house, with open windows letting in the sun. I dreamed of a table where we sat to eat without fear. I dreamed of voices that spoke instead of shouting, of hands that caressed instead of hitting. I didn't know if that dream would ever become reality. I didn't know what Birmingham had in store for us, what difficulties we would face, what new fears we would know. But I knew, with absolute certainty, that we would never go back, that I would rather die than live again under the yoke of fear. The bus advanced into the night, its iron rails cutting through the darkness like a path of light. And we, two broken but not defeated women, moved forward, leaving behind not just a town, but an entire life of submission. The bus arrived in Birmingham in the early hours of the morning. We got off exhausted, disoriented by the noise and movement of the station. I had never seen so many people together, so many colors, so many sounds. Millbrook would fit several times in that immense station. How will we find Mrs. Gertrude's nephew? I asked, clutching my mother's arm, afraid of getting separated in that crowd. She held firmly the letter that had been given to us. She said he would come to get us. We should wait at the main exit. We walked hesitantly, following the flow of people. The capital of Alabama received us with its intimidating grandeur. Tall buildings, honking cars, the smell of the city mixed with diesel smoke, and the aroma of hot dogs from the vendors on the sidewalks. It was a completely new world. We waited almost an hour until a man approached. It was Theodore, Mrs. Gertrude's nephew. Tall, with fair skin and a well-trimmed beard, he dressed with the simple elegance of a teacher, which we discovered was his profession. Mrs. Martha and Nancy? He asked, consulting a piece of paper. I'm Theodore, Gertrude's nephew. She telegraphed last night telling me about the situation. Come, let's go to my house. Theodore's apartment was in the Highlands neighborhood, on a tree-lined street with old houses and small buildings. It was a modest but comfortable place, with 2 bedrooms, a bright living room, and a small balcony with a view of the green of the trees. His wife, Claire, welcomed us with a hug and a table set for breakfast. You must be starving, she said, serving steaming coffee and still warm bread. Rest today. Tomorrow we'll think about what to do. On that first day, all we did was sleep, exhausted by the stress and the journey. When I woke up, it was already night, and it took me a few seconds to remember where I was and what had happened. I looked to the side and saw my mother sleeping deeply, her face finally relaxed, without the constant tension she carried in Millbrook. The next morning, Theodore and Claire sat with us for a frank conversation. My aunt explained a bit about your situation, said Theodore. You can stay here as long as you need, but I imagine you want to rebuild your lives, have independence. Yes, my mother responded promptly. We don't want to be a burden to you. We know how to work. We can look for jobs. I'm a professor at the University of Alabama, explained Theodore, and Claire is a nurse at the General Hospital. We have some contacts that can help. That's how our new life began. My mother got a job as a kitchen helper at the same hospital where Claire worked. I, thanks to Theodore's intervention, was accepted as an assistant in the university library, with the condition that I would resume my studies at night. In the first weeks, we lived in a constant state of alert. Every time someone knocked on the door, every time a man on the street looked even remotely like Arnold, we felt panic rise up our throats. The revolver remained hidden under my mother's mattress, a security we hoped we would never need to use. Claire noticed our fear. One night, after dinner, while Theodore was grading papers, she called us for a talk in the kitchen. You don't have to live in fear anymore, she said gently. You're in Birmingham now. It's a big city, he'll never find you. And if he does? I asked, giving voice to the fear that still haunted us. Then we'll face it together, she replied firmly. Theodore has friends in the police, in the courthouse. You're not alone anymore. Those words were like a balm. For the first time since we left Millbrook, I felt that perhaps, just perhaps, we could really start over. And that's what we did, step by step. I enrolled in the night course to complete middle school. My mother, besides working at the hospital, started doing small sewing jobs to supplement the income. Gradually, we were saving money to rent our own place. One day, coming home from work, I found my mother sitting on the balcony with Claire, both laughing at something. I stopped at the door, surprised. I couldn't remember the last time I had seen my mother laugh like that, with genuine joy. Come, daughter, she called me. Claire is teaching me how to make a wonderful orange cake. That sound, the carefree laughter of my mother, was for me the first concrete proof that we were truly free. Not just physically distant from Arnold, but beginning to free ourselves from the invisible chains that he and my father had placed on our souls. 6 months after our arrival, we managed to rent a small apartment in the Avondale neighborhood. It was a simple place, with just 1 bedroom that we shared, a tiny living room, and a cramped kitchen, but it was ours. For the first time, we had a home where the rules were our own. At the university library, I met people who expanded my horizons. Professors who lent me books, students who talked about ideas I had never heard before. It was there that I met Matthew, a law student who organized a discussion group on women's rights. You should participate, he invited me one day as I was cataloging new books. I think your experience would be valuable. I hesitated. I don't know if I have anything to contribute. I barely finished middle school. Life teaches more than any book, he replied with a smile. And from the little you've told me, you have a PhD in survival. That's how, at 15, I began to participate in the group's meetings. At first, I just listened, intimidated by the eloquence of the university students. But gradually, I began to speak, to share my story, to understand that what I had lived through was not an isolated case, but part of a larger system of oppression. The group met weekly in a borrowed room at the law school. We were about 15 people, mostly women, discussing everything from personal cases to proposals for legal changes. It was there that I first heard terms like feminism, patriarchy, female emancipation, words that gave names to what I had lived through, that helped me understand that my story was part of something bigger. In one of these meetings, a lawyer named Caroline Lewis, who sometimes guided the group, heard my account of our escape from Millbrook. "You never formally reported your brother," she observed. "That means that, legally, he could still claim authority over you since you're a minor." That statement fell like a bomb. All the fear we thought we had left behind returned in a wave. "What can we do?" I asked, terrified by the idea that Arnold could one day appear with the law on his side. "I can help you file for emancipation," offered Caroline. "But it would be easier if we had a formal case against him, with witnesses to the abuse." That night, I discussed at length with my mother. Going back to Millbrook to file a complaint was out of the question. But the idea that Arnold still had legal power over us was unbearable. "What if we wrote to Mrs. Gertrude?" I suggested. "She saw the bruises, knows our story. Perhaps she and Sheriff Bernard could testify on our behalf, send declarations." That's what we did. A week later, we received a letter from Mrs. Gertrude, confirming that both she and the sheriff were willing to testify. Even more surprising, she informed us that Arnold had left Millbrook shortly after our escape. "They say he went south, maybe to Mobile," she wrote. "He sold the house for a pittance and left without saying goodbye to anyone. It seems that the shame of having been arrested and of having lost control over you was too much for him." That news brought immense relief. Arnold was no longer in Millbrook, looking for us. He had fled, perhaps as ashamed as he was furious. Still, we proceeded with the emancipation process, with the tireless help of Caroline Lewis. There were months of bureaucracy, papers, visits to the courthouse. My mother, who previously barely spoke in public, now faced judges and prosecutors, telling our story with a dignity that filled me with pride. On the day of the final hearing, I was so nervous I could hardly breathe. The judge, an elderly man with white hair and a severe expression, heard the written testimonies of Mrs. Gertrude and the sheriff, as well as my mother's account. "Do you understand," he finally said, "that by emancipating your daughter, you are giving up your parental authority? That she will be considered legally an adult, with all the rights and responsibilities?" "I understand, Your Honor," my mother replied with a firm voice. "And there is nothing I wish more than to see my daughter free to make her own decisions without fear of any man." When the judge struck the gavel, granting my emancipation, I couldn't hold back the tears. They weren't just tears of relief, but of a deep understanding of what that moment symbolized. I was free, legally, officially free. At the exit of the courthouse, Caroline hugged us. "This deserves a celebration. Let's have lunch at the restaurant nearby." During lunch, she made an unexpected proposal. "Nancy, I've observed your interest in legal issues, your dedication to studies. Have you ever thought of studying law someday?" I laughed, surprised. "Law? Me? I barely finished middle school." "So what? You're young, intelligent, you have a strength that many don't have. If you want, I can guide you in your studies for the entrance exam." That possibility, which had never even crossed my mind, planted a seed that would grow in the following years. I, who had been raised to serve, to bow my head, to accept, now glimpsed a future where I could help other women to free themselves as Caroline was doing for us. Time passed, and Birmingham truly became our home. I finished middle school and began high school, always working at the library. My mother, with Claire's help, got a better job as a nursing assistant after taking a technical course. We now lived in a larger apartment still in Avondale, with a view of the park. On Sunday mornings, we would sit on the small balcony with coffee and biscuits, observing the movement in the park, The families arriving with their mats and umbrellas, the street vendors announcing their products. Who would have thought, "Huh, Mom," I commented on one of these Sundays, seeing her relaxed, with her hair loose in the wind, something unthinkable in the Millbrook days. If someone had told me 2 years ago that we would be here, living like this. She smiled, her eyes, once always frightened, now calm like the lake we observed. "It's as if we were born again, daughter. Sometimes I have to pinch myself to believe it's real." Not that everything was perfect. We still had nightmares. There were still days when a sudden noise made us jump, when a man resembling Arnold on the street made our hearts race. The scar of the past was there, probably always would be. But we had learned to live despite it, and more than that, to use our experience to help other women. My mother now participated in a support group at the hospital for women victims of domestic violence. I continued in the university group, more active than ever, and was already studying for the law school entrance exam under Caroline's guidance. In 1968, 3 years after our escape, I received a letter that would change the course of our lives again. It was from Theodore, who had moved to Asheville, North Carolina, to take a position at the newly created Western Carolina University. "Birmingham is wonderful," he wrote, "but if one day you want a change of scenery, Asheville is a special place. Calm, historic, with good people and growing opportunities. They're in need of teachers and health professionals. Think about it." I showed the letter to my mother without great expectations. After all, we had built our life in Birmingham, we had friends, work, plans. To my surprise, she seemed interested. "You know, daughter, sometimes I think Birmingham is still too close to Millbrook," she confessed. "Not that I'm afraid of Arnold appearing, but the memories are still very alive here." We talked about the possibility for weeks. I, in fact, was excited about the idea. I had just been accepted to law school and could transfer my enrollment to the college in Asheville. My mother, with her experience as a nursing assistant, would have no difficulty finding work. So at the beginning of 1969, we boarded another bus, this time not fleeing desperately, but consciously walking toward a new chapter in our lives. We left Birmingham with hearts tight with gratitude for everything the city had given us, but also with the excitement of those who embrace new challenges. When we arrived in Asheville, Theodore and Claire were waiting for us at the station, just as they had done 4 years earlier in Birmingham. But now we were different. Not 2 broken women fleeing from terror, but 2 independent citizens, owners of their lives and their destinies. "Welcome to your new home," said Theodore, hugging us. And that's exactly what Asheville became. Our home, our refuge, our place of peace. The historic city, with its stone streets and colonial mansions, welcomed us as if it had been waiting for us all our lives. It was there that I finished my law degree, that my mother became head nurse of the small local hospital, that we finally left behind the constant fear that, even in Birmingham, still accompanied us like a shadow. Years later, we learned through a letter from Mrs. Gertrude that Arnold had died in an accident in Mobile. The news didn't bring joy, but a strange feeling of closure, as if a chapter that had been left ajar could finally be completely closed. "May God have mercy on his soul," said my mother when she heard the news. Despite everything, he was my son. I couldn't be so generous. The scars were still there, even if they didn't hurt so much anymore. But I respected my mother's silent mourning, understanding that for her, the story was even more complex and painful. That night, sitting on the porch of our house in Asheville, a simple but cozy little house that we had managed to buy with our savings, we looked at the stars shining over the old rooftops of the city. "You know, Mom," I said, holding her hand, "I think we made it." "What, my daughter?" "Win, survive, start over." She squeezed my hand, her eyes shining with contained tears. "Yes, my daughter, we made it. And more than that, we showed that it's possible. That no woman needs to accept being less than she deserves to be." And so, under the starry sky of Asheville, we sealed our journey of pain and redemption, not as victims of a cruel system, but as protagonists of our own liberation. Today, at 73, when I look out the window of my porch here in Asheville and see the sun setting behind the Blue Ridge Mountains, I feel a peace that for a long time I thought impossible. This city, with its stone sidewalks, its historic homes, and its welcoming people, has become much more than a refuge. It has truly become my home. After I graduated in law, I worked for many years at the local courthouse, helping especially women in vulnerable situations. It wasn't a job that paid much, but it gave me a satisfaction that no money could buy. Seeing a woman leaving the office with her head held high, knowing her rights, ready to fight, reminded me of my own journey. It was at the courthouse that I met Thomas, a clerk newly arrived from Charlotte. He was a different man from all I had known, gentle, respectful, patient. Even so, it took me time to trust him, to accept that not all men were like my father or my brother. "I'm in no hurry," he would tell me, when he perceived my reluctance. "I have all the time in the world to wait until you feel safe." We married in 1974 in a simple ceremony at the small chapel of St. Lawrence. My mother, radiant in the light blue dress she had sewn herself, walked me down the aisle. Thomas waited with a nervous smile and teary eyes. Theodore and Claire came from Raleigh, where they had moved, bringing the first of their 3 children. We established our life in a simple but cozy house in the historic center of Asheville. The following year, our daughter Victoria was born, a name chosen for symbolizing everything we had conquered. 3 years later came August, completing our family. My mother, now established as a respected nurse at the local hospital, lived in a house close to ours. Her transformation over the years was something that moved me daily. That fragile and submissive woman from Millbrook had become a competent professional, a loving grandmother, and a woman who owned her own life. On Sunday afternoons, we would gather the whole family in our backyard. Thomas would grill meat on the improvised barbecue, the children would run around the garden, and my mother and I would talk about everything and nothing, appreciating the precious simplicity of those moments of peace. "Who would have thought, my daughter," she would sometimes comment, observing the family scene, "that after everything we would have this?" And I would squeeze her hand, without words to express the gratitude for the path we had traveled together. The years passed, the children grew up. Victoria followed in my footsteps and graduated in law, while August discovered his talent for medicine. Both left Asheville to study, but always returned on holidays and vacations, keeping alive the bond with their roots. In 1996, I lost my mother to a cancer that consumed her quickly. It was a deep pain, a void that never completely filled. But there was also a peace in knowing that she departed, having fully lived the second half of her life, surrounded by love and respect. At the funeral, as I watched the coffin descend into the earth, I thought of the incredible journey of that woman. From the girl who married as a teenager to a violent man, to the woman who found the courage to flee, to start over, to reinvent herself. If there is an example of resilience in my life, it was my mother. The following years brought new joys and challenges. Victoria married and had 2 daughters, my dear granddaughters, Laura and Cecilia. August established himself as a doctor in Charlotte, visiting us whenever possible. Thomas and I retired and began to dedicate more time to small pleasures, cultivating the garden, reading in the shade of the trees, visiting friends, participating in the traditional festivities of Asheville. And it was during this quieter period that I rediscovered knitting. My mother had taught me the first stitches back in Millbrook, but I had never taken it very seriously. One day, organizing old things in the attic, I found a small knitted cloth that she had made. Sitting right there, among dusty boxes, I cried as I ran my fingers over the delicate stitches, feeling as if I were touching her hands again. The next day, I bought yarn and needles and began to practice. At first, it was just a way to connect with memories of my mother. But soon it became a passion, a therapy. Each stitch was like a small meditation, each completed piece an achievement. Victoria, seeing my enthusiasm, suggested that I sell my creations at the local crafts fair. "Your pieces are beautiful, Mom. Other people will want to have them." Reluctant at first, I ended up accepting the suggestion. To my surprise, my doilies, placemats, and especially the knitted sweaters were a success. It wasn't a big business, but it brought a special satisfaction to see someone choosing something my hands had created. Gradually, the little booth at the fair became my small kingdom. On Saturdays, I would wake up excited, knowing I would spend the day talking with people, hearing stories, sharing my own. It was more than a job. It was a way to remain connected to the community. In 2015, I suffered another hard blow when Thomas departed after a sudden heart attack. 41 years of companionship, respect, and love ended in an instant. The grief was deep, the house became too big, too silent. Victoria insisted that I move closer to her in Charlotte, but I couldn't leave Asheville. This city had welcomed me in my new beginning, had been the stage of my redemption. Every corner, every stone sidewalk held precious memories. Besides, there was my booth at the fair, my friends from the prayer group, the neighbors who had become family over the years. There was a life built here that I wasn't ready to abandon. "I'll be fine," I assured my daughter. "I have my knitting, my friends, my memories." And so it has been. I found a new rhythm of life, calmer, more introspective, but no less rich. My mornings begin early, with coffee on the porch, watching the city wake up. Then, I dedicate a few hours to knitting, creating new pieces for the fair or gifts for family and friends. In the afternoons, when the body asks for rest, I read or watch some program on television. Sometimes I receive visits from friends for coffee and a chat. Mrs. Eleanor, my 80-year-old neighbor, appears almost daily, bringing treats or just to talk about the happenings in the city. The weekends are busier. On Saturdays, the crafts fair takes up much of my day. On Sundays, when they're not traveling, Victoria and the family come to have lunch with me. Seeing my granddaughters growing up, hearing their stories, their dreams, fills my heart with a deep joy. Laura, the oldest, is already in college, studying history. Cecilia, the youngest, is finishing high school and talks about pursuing a military career, something that, in my youth, would be unthinkable for a woman. Seeing them so self-assured, so free to choose their paths, makes me feel that all our struggle was worth it. "Grandma, tell again how you and Great-Grandma escaped from Millbrook," Cecilia sometimes asks, fascinated by the story that to her sounds like a distant adventure, almost like a movie. And I tell, never omitting the difficult parts, because I believe it's important that they know where we came from, that they understand that the freedom they enjoy today was won with tears and courage by women who came before them. In recent years, I began to record these stories in a notebook. I'm not a writer, but I wanted to leave a record for when I'm no longer here. I wanted my granddaughters, and perhaps someday my great-grandchildren, to be able to understand the journey of their family. "It's important to remember," I said to Victoria when I showed her the notebook. "Not out of resentment or bitterness, but to value what we've conquered, to never take freedom for granted." Today, sitting on my porch in Asheville, watching the movement of the street while working on another knitted piece, I feel a deep gratitude for my mother's courage on that decisive night, for the friends who extended their hands when we needed it most, for the path that, despite all the difficulties, brought us here. Life hasn't always been easy. There were losses, there were tears, there were moments of doubt, but there were also achievements, joys, love. There was a transformation of two broken women into full human beings, owners of their destinies. And when I look back to that frightened girl from Millbrook, I want to tell her, "You made it, Nancy. You survived. And more than that, you flourished." My dear ones who have followed me this far, thank you for listening to this old lady's story. Sharing these memories isn't easy, but I feel it's necessary, because silence only protects those who do evil, never those who suffer. If you're going through a situation similar to what I lived through, I want to say, first of all, that you are not alone. Patriarchy and domestic violence still exist, still silently destroy lives, still hide behind phrases like family matter or that's just how men are. But today, unlike in my time, there are more resources, more people willing to help, more awareness that this is not normal, not acceptable, not inevitable. I learned that age doesn't define our strength, but rather our capacity to start anew each day. When I fled from Millbrook at 14, I thought my life was over before it even began. But I discovered that as long as we breathe, there is hope. As long as there is tomorrow, there is possibility. The first lesson I learned in my journey was the importance of asking for help. The system that oppresses us feeds on our isolation, our shame, our silence. When I had the courage to tell Mrs. Gertrude what was happening at home, when my mother finally stood up against my brother, when we sought Caroline Lewis's support in Birmingham, each of these moments was a step toward our liberation. My wrinkles are maps of survival. Each one tells a story of pain overcome. I'm not ashamed of them. I carry them with pride, like medals from a war I won. Because surviving abuse, oppression, constant fear is a daily battle that requires more courage than many will ever need to have. Life taught me that even in the deepest darkness, our inner light never goes out. In the darkest moments in Millbrook, when fear seemed to consume me completely, there was still a small flame of hope, of dignity that refused to die. This flame may seem weak, almost invisible at times, but it's there, and it's what guides us out of the tunnel. I never allowed my dignity to be stolen, even when they tried to take everything from me. My body they could control, my movements they could restrict, but my thoughts, my dreams, my essence, these were mine, only mine. Remember this, no one can take who you are inside unless you allow it. I discovered that we are stronger than we imagine, especially when we think we can't take it anymore. So many times I thought about giving up, about accepting that life as my destiny. But something inside me and inside my mother refused to accept. And that stubbornness, that resistance, even when it seemed useless, was what saved us. Time doesn't heal all wounds, but it teaches us to live with them and still smile. I won't lie and say I forgot everything, that I completely forgave, that I don't carry scars. They are here. They're part of me. But I learned that I can be happy despite them, that I can build a beautiful life even carrying this past. My story isn't about what they did to me, but about how I chose to respond. That is perhaps the most important lesson I can share. We are not defined by what we suffer, but by the choices we make afterward. I chose not to become bitter, not to distrust all men, not to perpetuate the cycle of pain. I chose to build, not destroy. I learned that true strength isn't in never falling, but in getting up every time. And how many times I fell. How many nights I cried in hiding, thinking I couldn't face another day. But each morning, there I was, standing again, one step at a time, one day at a time. Abuse leaves invisible scars, but recovery shows that we can flourish even after the storm. Like those stubborn flowers that grow in the cracks of the asphalt, we find ways to grow even in the most hostile, most unlikely environments. I discovered that my voice, even trembling, has power when I decide to use it. That's why I'm here today, telling my story. Because I know that somewhere, someone who is living their own personal hell might hear and think, if she could do it, I can too. Age has given me the wisdom to understand that it's never too late to start over. At 14, 30, 50, or 70 years old, we can always turn the page. We can always write a new chapter. Life is generous in giving us new opportunities, new dawns. My experience taught me that our story doesn't end with the painful chapters. They are important, they shape us, they challenge us, but they are not the end. There is so much more to live, to experience, to feel. There is so much beauty waiting to be discovered. I learned that surviving is a form of resistance, and living well is the best revenge. Each sincere smile, each moment of peace, each achievement, small or large, is a victory against those who tried to destroy us. If you know someone who is living in an abusive relationship, don't close your eyes. A word of support, a friendly shoulder, a hand extended can make all the difference. Be the Mrs. Gertrude, the Caroline Lewis, or the Theodore in someone's life. Be the person who says, "I believe in you, I'm here for you, we'll find a way out together." In every country, in every culture, there are resources and organizations dedicated to helping victims of domestic violence. Seek information about protection services in your region. Don't wait for the situation to improve on its own. That rarely happens. On the contrary, abuse tends to escalate, to intensify over time. Observe the signs: excessive control, forced isolation, constant humiliation, fear of expressing opinions. These are warnings that should not be ignored. Violence doesn't always leave visible marks. Sometimes the deepest wounds are those that no one can see. Human dignity is a universal value. It doesn't matter where you were born, what your religion, your culture, your social condition. No one has the right to diminish you, to hurt you, to control you. This is a principle that transcends borders and generations. As a global community, we have the responsibility to protect the vulnerable, to break the cycle of violence, to create a world where stories like mine become increasingly rare. This begins with small daily actions, educating our children about respect, questioning sexist jokes, offering help when we perceive something is wrong. And to you who suffer in silence, I want to leave a message of hope. There is a future beyond fear. There is a life waiting for you, a life of freedom, of peace, of self-determination. The path won't be easy. Mine certainly wasn't. But each step is worth it. I, Nancy Mae Thompson, a 73-year-old lady who lived to tell her story, am living proof that it's possible to survive, overcome, and flourish after abuse. And if I could, you can too. My dear ones who are watching me, if this story touched your heart, please do more than just watch. Leave your like on this video, subscribe to and turn on the notification bell. Each subscription is like a hand extended, helping to carry this message of hope to more people who need to hear that they are not alone, that there is a way out, that there is life beyond abuse. And tell me in the comments, which town are you watching from? Are you watching in the early morning with your coffee or at the end of the day when you're resting? I read all comments with great affection. Because, my dears, what I never told anyone until today is that on the night we fled from Millbrook, my mother didn't use that gun just to defend us. When Arnold found us at the station, drunk and violent, trying to drag us back, she shot. Not to kill, but she wounded him in the leg. It was that shot that gave us time to board the bus, that gave us freedom. I carried this secret for decades, the weight of knowing that my sweet mother was forced to such an extreme to protect us. And that is something that will accompany me until my last breath.